America made a promise. A powerful, bold, unbreakable promise to the world. A promise that said the United States Navy would rule the seas with 355 warships, the most powerful fleet ever assembled in modern history. Politicians stood at podiums with fire in their eyes. Admirals gave speeches dripping with confidence. Congress voted it into law. The whole country believed it. And then, year by year, one budget battle at a time, one failed program at a time, one broken shipyard promise at a time, that dream started to crack. And the world noticed. China noticed most of all. Welcome to the story of the 355-ship Navy. The most ambitious naval expansion plan America has attempted in decades. A plan that was written in law, celebrated in headlines, and then quietly, almost invisibly, buried under the weight of reality. This is not just a story about ships. This is a story about promises made in the halls of power and broken on the floors of shipyards. This is a story about what happens when the greatest military nation on earth loses sight of what it actually takes to build and sustain a dominant fleet. And this is a story that is not over. Not by a long shot. Let's go back to December 2016. The United States was in a season of dramatic political change. Donald Trump had just won a stunning election victory on a platform of strength, rebuilding the military and projecting American power. The mood was electric. People wanted boldness. They wanted vision. And the United States Navy delivered exactly that. On December 15th, 2016, the Navy released what it called a four-structure assessment. And inside that document was a number that would become legendary in defense circles. 355 ships. That was the goal. That was the dream. The Navy declared that it needed 355 battle force ships to meet the growing demands of the world, to deter China, to keep the seas open, to protect American interests everywhere from the South China Sea to the Persian Gulf, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now, to understand why this number mattered so deeply, you have to understand how far the Navy had fallen. Back in the 1980s, during the Reagan era, the United States Navy operated nearly 600 ships. 600. It was a stunning armada. It was the iron fist of American foreign policy. But after the Cold War ended, budgets were slashed, ships were retired early, and the fleet shrank dramatically. By 2003, the Navy fell below 300 ships. And despite years of promises, it stayed below 300 ships for the next 2 decades. By 2016, the fleet hovered around 275 to 280 battle force ships. For defense hawks in Congress and military planners watching China's Navy grow larger every single year, this was not acceptable. Something had to change. And so the 355 ship goal was born. It was not just an aspiration. Congress took that goal and turned it into the law of the land. On December 12, 2017, President Trump signed a National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2018 into law. Section 1025 of that act explicitly stated that it was the policy of the United States to achieve and maintain a navy of not fewer than 355 battle force ships. Let that sink in for a moment. Congress passed a law saying the United States must have 355 warships. It was written in federal statute. It was the official policy of the nation. And Trump, who had campaigned on rebuilding the military and talked enthusiastically about a 350-ship navy, threw his full public support behind the effort. The goal had political backing at the highest levels. The timing felt right. But almost immediately, the uncomfortable question started. How long would this actually take? How much would it cost? Did the nation's shipyards even have the capacity to pull it off? In April 2017, just months after the four-structure assessment was released, the Congressional Budget Office, which is the independent, nonpartisan financial watchdog of Congress, released an analysis that stopped the enthusiasm cold. The CBO looked at the 355-ship goal and delivered a sobering verdict. Even at an accelerated pace, Even if the country nearly doubled its shipbuilding budgets compared to historical levels, the earliest the Navy could possibly reach 355 ships was 2032. That was assuming everything went perfectly. No dilas, no cost overruns, no cancel programs, everything on schedule. And even then, the CBO noted that reaching the specific submarine targets within the goal was essentially impossible by that timeline, because you simply cannot build enough nuclear-powered submarines fast enough. The shipyard workforce is not big enough. The facilities are not large enough, and you cannot create qualified nuclear welders overnight. At a more realistic pace of spending, the CBO said the Navy would not reach 355 ships until 2047, 30 years away. The 5-year-olds of 2017 would be old enough to run for president before the Navy hit its goal. That number hit Washington like a bucket of cold water. Critics said the goal was unrealistic. Supporters said the critics were defeatists. The debate was fierce. But Congress had already voted. The law was on the books, and the Navy was expected to figure it out. So what exactly does 355 ships mean? What ships are we talking about? The 355 ship force structure assessment was not a vague number. It was specific. The Navy wanted 12 aircraft carriers, up from 11. It wanted 104 large surface combatants, including cruisers and destroyers. It wanted 52 small surface combatants. It wanted 66 nuclear-powered attack submarines, a massive jump from the 48 that existed at the time. It wanted 37 amphibious warfare ships. It wanted 32 logistics and support ships. And it wanted 6 ballistic missile submarines dedicated to offensive nuclear deterrence. Collectively, this fleet was designed to project overwhelming power in 2 major theaters simultaneously, to dominate contested waters, and to give adversaries, particularly China, a reason to think very hard before picking a fight with the United States at sea. The ambition was staggering, and the price tag matched it. The CBO estimated that meeting the 355 ship goal through new construction alone would cost an average of $26.7 billion annually over 30 years in 2017 dollars. That figure was roughly 42 to 48% above the historical levels of Navy shipbuilding spending. For comparison, the Navy had been spending around $18 to $20 billion a year on building new ships. Getting to 355 would require sustaining a spending rate far beyond anything the country had routinely achieved. Defense analysts pointed out that this required not just congressional authorization, but consistent, sustained appropriations across multiple administrations, multiple Congresses, and multiple budget cycles. American democracy, with its annual budget fights and political swings, does not exactly excel at that kind of sustained, unwavering commitment. But let us give the dream its due. In the first Trump administration, there was genuine energy behind naval expansion. The fiscal year 2019 budget requested 13 new ships. The fiscal year 2020 budget also came in strong. There was real talk of a generational effort to rebuild the fleet. And at the shipyards, workers were proud of the mission they were part of. Building warships is not just a job. It is an act of national service. The men and women who weld steel plates onto submarines and install missile systems on destroyers know that their work protects the country. That sense of purpose is real, and it mattered in those early years of enthusiasm. But reality has a way of being absolutely relentless. And as the years rolled forward from 2017 toward 2025, the gap between the 355 ship dream and the actual fleet grew wider and more painful with every passing year. Let us talk about the littoral combat ship, because this program is one of the most instructive cautionary tales in American defense acquisition history. The littoral combat ship, or LCS, was supposed to be a fast, versatile, affordable small combatant. It was designed to do shallow water missions near coastlines, things like mine-sweeping, anti-submarine work in confined waters, and surface warfare. The concept was innovative. A modular ship where you could swap out mission packages depending on what was needed. Anti-submarine today, mine clearing tomorrow, surface warfare the day after that. Flexible, smart, efficient. That was the pitch. The reality was a nightmare. The LCS was plagued from the beginning by mechanical failures. Propulsion systems broke down regularly. The modular mission packages, which sounded brilliant on paper, turned out to be plagued by unreliability. Years passed, and none of the mission packages reached full operational capability on schedule. Cost ballooned to well over $500 million per hull, far above the original estimates. And perhaps most damning of all, naval analysts began questioning whether the ship could actually survive in a contested combat environment against a real adversary. The LCS was fast. It was relatively inexpensive compared to a destroyer, but it was thinly armored, lightly armed, and its survivability in a genuine fight was deeply questionable. The Navy had built dozens of ships that many critics felt were not truly ready for war. The LCS story did not end in triumph. It ended in cancellation and embarrassment. The Navy announced that it would retire many of the Freedom variant littoral combat ships early, far before the end of their planned service lives. Ships that had cost American taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars each were being pushed toward decommissioning well ahead of schedule. The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, which is the auditing arm of Congress, found that the Navy had essentially wasted those resources. The LCS program became a symbol of everything that could go wrong when ambition outruns common sense in defense acquisition. But the Navy was supposed to have learned from the LCS disaster. That is what officials told Congress repeatedly. We learned our lessons, they said. We will not make those same mistakes again. We will use proven designs. We will be disciplined. We will be patient. That was the promise behind the next program, the Constellation-class frigate. The Constellation-class frigate, officially the FFG-62 class, was born out of the Navy's FFG-X competition launched in 2017. The goal was to build a capable, survivable, multi-mission frigate to replace the LCS and fill the huge capability gap left behind when the Navy retired all of its Oliver Hazard Perry-class frigates back in 2015. The Perry-class frigates have been workhorses, not glamorous, not cutting-edge, but reliable and useful. When they were retired without a direct replacement, the fleet lost dozens of small combatants. The LCS was supposed to plug that gap. It failed. Now the Constellation class was supposed to actually fix the problem. The Navy made a smart-sounding decision from the start. Instead of designing a new ship from scratch, which historically leads to years of delays and cost overruns, the Navy decided to base the new frigate on an existing European design. Specifically, the Italian FREMM frigate built by Fincantieri, an Italian shipbuilding company. The FREMM was a proven, battle-tested design already in service with multiple navies. It was praised for its reliability, its quiet acoustic signature, and its flexibility. The plan was to adapt the FREMM design only where necessary to add American weapons and combat systems, and then build a relatively affordable, low-risk frigate quickly. In April 2020, the Navy awarded the contract to Fincantieri Marinette Marine, the American subsidiary of the Italian company. It looked like a sound plan. And then came the design changes, and more design changes, and more design changes after that. The Navy and its various stakeholders began loading requirements onto the FREMM hull. New systems, new weapons, new electronics, new requirements from commanders who wanted more capability. The ship started growing. The design kept changing. Weight issues emerged as the ship grew heavier than the original hull was designed to handle. The suppliers that had to integrate their systems with a modified parent design reported serious difficulties. The schedule started slipping. Costs started rising. By the mid-2020s, the Constellation-class frigate program was described as overweight, delayed, and over budget. A GAO report in 2024 warned of significant schedule slippages and rising costs. In November 2025, the Navy announced the cancellation of 4 out of 6 contracted Constellation-class frigates. Only the first two, the USS Constellation and the USS Congress, would be completed. The program that was supposed to be low-risk, off-the-shelf, and affordable had become exactly what it was designed to prevent. Navy Secretary John Phelan framed it as a strategic decision. He said the Navy was reshaping how it builds its fleet, moving away from the Constellation class as part of a broader shift toward unmanned and distributed systems. That may be true as a forward-looking rationale, but it did not change the bitter reality on the ground. The program failed. The Navy had lost years, lost billions of dollars, and lost hull numbers it desperately needed to grow toward 355. And then there is the submarine story. This one keeps defense planners awake at night more than anything else. The 355-ship force structure assessment called for 66 nuclear-powered attack submarines. At the time the goal was set, the Navy had 48. Building 18 more attack submarines, all nuclear-powered, all Virginia-class boats, was always going to be the hardest part of the 355-ship plan. Nuclear submarines take years to build. They require extraordinary levels of precision. The workers who build them need years of specialized training. The facilities are unique. There are only 2 shipyards in the entire United States capable of building nuclear submarines: Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia and Electric Boat in Connecticut. That is it. 2 yards to supply the entire nuclear submarine fleet of the world's most powerful Navy. The Navy's plan called for building 2 Virginia-class submarines per year. That was the goal since fiscal year 2011. It sounds achievable, 2 submarines a year. But in reality, production has consistently fallen short. Actual Virginia-class production has averaged around 1.1 to 1.2 boats per year in recent years. The gap between what is needed and what is being delivered keeps widening. The workforce at submarine shipyards is not large enough. The supply chains are strained. And on top of the attack submarine shortage, the Navy also needs to build Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines to replace the aging Ohio-class boats that carry the nation's submarine-launched nuclear missiles. The Columbia-class program, which represents the absolute highest priority in naval shipbuilding because it underpins the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent, was itself running 12 to 16 months behind schedule as of recent assessments. To put the submarine crisis in stark terms, reports indicated that roughly 40% of the Navy's available submarines were waiting in maintenance queues in 2023 because shipyards simply did not have enough capacity to service them on time. Submarines sitting at the pier waiting for maintenance are submarines that are not patrolling the seas. They are not deterring China. They are not protecting Taiwan. They are not tracking Russian submarines in the North Atlantic. The readiness gap created by the maintenance backlog is as dangerous in many ways as the shortfall in new construction. Now let us pull back and look at the big picture of what has happened to the fleet between 2017 and 2025. When the 355-ship goal was signed into law at the end of 2017, the Navy had approximately 280 ships. The law said get to 355. 8 years later, as of October 2025, the Navy had 293 Battle Force ships. That is an increase of about 13 ships in 8 years. At that rate, the Navy would not reach 355 ships for well over a century. The Congressional Budget Office, in its analysis of the Navy's 2025 shipbuilding plan, projected that the fleet would actually shrink in the near term, potentially falling to as few as 283 ships by 2027, before eventually beginning to grow again. The fleet was not growing toward the goal. It was still trying to hold ground against retirements. Why was the fleet not growing faster? The answer is a combination of factors that reinforce each other in a vicious cycle that defense analysts have taken to calling the shipbuilding doom loop. Ship programs face cost overruns. cost overruns consume budget that was supposed to fund new ships. Fewer new ships means the fleet does not grow. Meanwhile, older ships are retiring on schedule or even early because maintenance backlogs make keeping them going increasingly expensive. A GAO analysis published in early 2025 assessed 37 of the 45 Battle Force ships under construction as of September 2024. Every single one of those 37 ships was experiencing delays. Not some of them, not most of them, all of them. Every ship under construction was behind schedule. Total cost overruns for previously authorized ships amounted to $3.4 billion in fiscal year 2024 and a staggering $10.4 billion in fiscal year 2025. These are not small rounding errors. These were enormous sums of money that had to come from somewhere, and they crowded out new construction. The workforce problem is deep and it is real. In 1980, American shipyards employed nearly 200,000 workers. By mid-2025, that number had fallen to around 145,000 workers, a reduction of more than 36% over 45 years. Naval officials and defense experts have said the country needs to hire 100,000 new workers just for submarine production alone, part of a broader need for 250,000 new workers across the maritime industrial base. Training a skilled shipbuilder takes years. Training a nuclear-qualified welder or machinist takes even longer. You cannot conjure that workforce overnight with a presidential executive order or a congressional mandate. You build it over years with stable funding, consistent contracts, and a genuine national commitment to the shipbuilding industry as a strategic asset. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the workhorse of the surface fleet, has seen its unit cost rise 26% above inflation over the past 5 years. The Virginia-class submarine has seen its per-unit cost rise 22% above inflation over the same period. The ships that the Navy is counting on to fill the 355 ship goal are getting more expensive faster than the budget is growing. That is a fundamental math problem that no amount of optimistic language in a budget submission can fix. There's also the question of what the Biden administration did, or rather did not do, with the 355 ship goal. The Biden administration never explicitly endorsed the 355 ship goal as a Biden priority. It did not explicitly reject it either, but the actions spoke clearly enough. The fiscal year 2023 budget proposed decommissioning 24 ships, including 16 before the end of their planned service lives. 9 Freedom variant littoral combat ships were among the ships proposed for early retirement. Critics in Congress were furious. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi called it a blueprint for American weakness. He said the Navy's plan would worsen years of underinvestment. Republicans and some Democrats pushed back hard, arguing that retiring serviceable ships without replacements ready was strategically reckless given the pace of China's naval growth. Under a constrained budget, difficult choices had to be made. Navy officials argued that buying back ships the Navy wanted to retire would cost billions better spent on the next generation of platforms. They pointed to the need to invest in unmanned systems, in advanced weapons, in cyber capabilities, in the technologies that would define the future of naval warfare rather than just counting hulls. There was genuine strategic logic in that argument, but it did not change the uncomfortable reality that the fleet was not growing toward 355. It was hovering around 290, fighting to stay above 300, and all the while, the threat that had justified the 355 ship goal in the first place was growing at a breathtaking pace. China. The People's Liberation Army Navy had been the sleeping giant of global naval competition for decades. But by the time the 355 ship goal was being debated, the giant was wide awake, fully caffeinated, and building warships at a rate that stunned Western defense analysts. China surpassed the United States in total battle force ship numbers sometime between 2015 and 2020. By the end of 2024, the United States Navy operated roughly 290 ships. China operated 370. And according to Pentagon projections, China's fleet is expected to reach 395 ships by 2025 and 435 ships by 2030. Let those numbers sit with you for a moment. 435 Chinese warships by 2030, against a projected American fleet that, under current funding plans, is expected to hover around 294 ships in 2030. The gap is not closing. It is widening. The nation that set a goal of 355 ships because of the Chinese threat is actually falling further behind that threat, not catching up to it. But here is where the story gets even more alarming. It is not just about how many ships China is currently operating. It is about how fast China can build new ones. A declassified intelligence slide from the Office of Naval Intelligence estimated that China has 232 times the shipbuilding capability of the United States. 232 times. Not twice. Not 10 times. 232 times. China's shipbuilding industry is massive, state-subsidized, and built on a civil-military fusion model that allows commercial shipyards to pivot quickly to military production. China is the world's largest commercial shipbuilder, producing over half of the world's commercial tonnage. The United States, by comparison, produces a tiny fraction of global commercial shipbuilding. The industrial muscle that America once used to win the Second World War by outbuilding every adversary combined has atrophied to almost nothing in the commercial sector. This matters enormously for wartime scenarios. In a sustained conflict, ships get damaged and sunk. The side that can replace its losses fastest has a profound strategic advantage. War games conducted by think tanks like the Center for Strategic and International Studies have produced sobering results. In simulated conflicts over Taiwan, China absorbed enormous losses and kept fighting because it could absorb and eventually replace those losses more readily than the United States. SIS found that in one set of war games, China lost 52 major surface warships against between 7 and 20 American equivalents. Even with those catastrophic losses, China still had more surface warships than the United States and was able to keep fighting. The numbers game has terrifying implications in a real shooting war. Now, the United States is not without significant advantages. Let's be clear about that, because this is not a story of inevitable American defeat. The United States Navy is not just counting hulls. It is counting capability. America operates 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, the most powerful force projection platforms ever built. China operates 3, with a 4th reportedly under construction. American carriers are larger, nuclear-powered for unlimited endurance, and carry far more aircraft with far greater capability than Chinese carriers. American submarines are quieter, more sophisticated, and more capable than Chinese submarines. The F-35 stealth fighter, which flies from American carriers and amphibious ships, gives American naval aviation a qualitative edge that China is working hard but has not yet fully closed. American sailors are the most experienced in the world. The United States Navy has been fighting at sea for 250 years. China's modern Navy is roughly 3 decades old and has essentially no combat experience. American allies matter enormously too. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force operates 4 cruisers, 34 destroyers, 10 frigates, and 4 helicopter carriers, 2 of which can now operate F-35 stealth fighters. South Korea operates its own substantial fleet. Australia is expanding aggressively. These allied navies, in a conflict with China, would add enormous combat power that the raw American ship count alone does not reflect. If you add American and Japanese naval forces together, for instance, China's numerical advantage disappears. But strategy and capability can only compensate so much for industrial decline. and the trajectory has defense planners genuinely worried. The Navy is reportedly 20 years behind schedule in maintaining its existing fleet. 37 out of 37 ships under construction are delayed. Frigate programs have been canceled. Submarine production is running at barely half the required rate. Cost overruns are consuming billions that should be building new ships. The workforce that America needs to execute its shipbuilding plans does not yet exist at the required scale. And the goals set in 2016, the promise made in 2017, has slipped from an achievable ambition to something that now looks, in the cold light of 2025, more like a distant aspiration. In June 2023, the Navy acknowledged the need to update the 355 ship goal. It sent a new force-level goal to Congress called the Battle Force Ship Assessment and Requirement Report. In March 2024, the Navy released the details publicly. The new goal called for 381 manned ships, plus 134 large unmanned surface and underwater vehicles. Larger in numbers, but also reflecting a fundamentally different vision for what the fleet should look like. The unmanned systems would be a significant part of the future force. Autonomous surface vessels, drone submarines, unmanned systems that could carry weapons and sensors without putting sailors at risk. The Navy was acknowledging that the future fleet would not look like the past fleet, and that you could not simply build your way to dominance by counting manned hulls the same way you had in 1985. And even that 381 ship goal is already being superseded. The Navy has referenced a forthcoming concept called the Golden Fleet Force Level Goal, which would incorporate even more unmanned systems and reflect the rapidly evolving technology of artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, and distributed maritime operations. The exact details of the Golden Fleet had not been released as of early 2026, but the direction is clear. The Navy is moving away from a world defined by large, expensive, few-man platforms toward a world defined by many, smaller, cheaper, increasingly autonomous platforms networked together. A fleet of many rather than a fleet of the mighty few. This strategic evolution is genuinely promising. The Navy's distributed maritime operations concept, which underpins all of this thinking, argues that spreading weapons and sensors across many smaller platforms makes it harder for an adversary to defeat the fleet with a concentrated strike. If you have 10 expensive ships carrying 100 missiles each, a well-aimed salvo can destroy enormous combat power in minutes. If you have 1,000 small, unmanned vessels spread across 1,000 miles of ocean, each carrying 10 missiles, the calculus of attack becomes vastly more complex. The adversary must find and kill 1,000 targets instead of 10. That is a genuine strategic advantage. But unmanned systems are not yet proven in sustained high-intensity combat. The technology is advancing rapidly, but the gap between a concept briefed in a Pentagon conference room and a combat-proven operational system is measured in years and billions of dollars of testing and development. The Navy is betting heavily on a technology revolution that is still in progress. So where does that leave the 355 ship goal in 2025 and beyond? It leaves it as a historical marker. A statement of intent from 2016 that galvanized the debate about American naval power, forced serious conversations about shipbuilding capacity and industrial base limitations, and ultimately revealed deep structural problems in how America builds and sustains its fleet. The specific number, 355, may never be reached by a traditional count of manned ships. The Navy itself has moved on to different goals and different architectures. But the urgency that gave birth to the 355 ship goal has not diminished. If anything, it has grown more acute. The shipbuilding industrial base crisis that prevented the 355 ship dream from becoming reality did not emerge overnight. It is the product of decades of decisions. Decisions to close shipyards when Cold War budgets shrank. Decisions to retire experienced workers without training their replacements. decisions to allow the commercial shipbuilding industry to essentially disappear from American shores, taking with it the scale and workforce pipeline that once made American shipbuilding the envy of the world. Decisions in Congress to fund ships in irregular spurts rather than in the steady, predictable stream that private shipbuilders need to invest in their own capacity. Decisions by the Navy itself to pursue overly ambitious designs that pushed immature technology into production before it was ready, resulting in the LCS disaster, the Zumwalt disaster, and the Constellation-class disaster one after another. The Congressional Budget Office, in its analysis of the Navy's 2025 shipbuilding plan, projected that total shipbuilding costs would need to average around $40 billion per year through 2054 to meet current fleet goals. That is roughly double the historical pace of Navy shipbuilding investment. The Navy's total budget would need to grow from around $255 billion today to approximately $340 billion by 2054. These are not small budget adjustments. These are generational commitments of national resources. Whether American democracy can sustain that kind of consistent, long-term investment without interruption from elections, recessions, competing priorities, and political gridlock is an open question. It has never done it before. The stakes of getting this wrong cannot be overstated. The United States Navy has been the guarantor of global maritime security for 80 years. American naval power made it possible for international trade to flow freely across the world's oceans. It made it possible for allies in Europe and Asia to rebuild after the Second World War under the protection of American sea power. It deterred the Soviet Union from using its own naval strength to reshape the global order. It keeps the sea lanes open through which 90% of global trade travels. A navy too small to execute that mission does not just threaten American security. It threatens the entire architecture of the international order that American power helped build after 1945. China understands this perfectly. Its naval expansion is not random. It is strategic and purposeful. It is designed specifically to challenge American dominance in the Western Pacific, to give Beijing the military leverage it needs to resolve the Taiwan question on its own terms, to push American naval forces away from China's near seas, and ultimately to position China as the dominant maritime power in the most economically dynamic region on Earth. Every ship China launches is a step toward that goal, and every ship America fails to build on schedule is a step that falls short of the response that strategy demands. The 355 ship story is ultimately a story about will, about whether a democracy can make long-term strategic investments in an era of short-term political thinking, about whether a nation that was once the greatest industrial power in human history can rediscover the manufacturing capacity and the skilled workforce that made it great, about whether the men and women in Washington, in the Pentagon, in the Navy's acquisition offices, and in the shipyards themselves can learn from decades of failures and build something better, faster, smarter, more affordable, more reliable. The answer is not written yet. The trajectory as of 2025 is not encouraging. The fleet sits at 293 ships, not 355. Every ship under construction is delayed. Major programs have been canceled. The budget gap between what is needed and what is funded remains enormous. The workforce shortfall is severe, and China keeps building, ship after ship after ship, at a pace the United States cannot currently match. But American history is also full of moments when the country woke up to a strategic reality it had been avoiding and responded with a ferocity that surprised the world. The industrial mobilization of the Second World War was the most stunning example. America went from a modest military-industrial base to building hundreds of warships, thousands of aircraft, and millions of tons of war material in just a few years. That capacity was the product of investment, planning, workforce training, and national will that had been quietly building for years before the crisis hit. The lesson is not that America cannot do this. The lesson is that doing it requires making the decisions today that will pay off years from now. Not after the crisis arrives, before it arrives. The 355-ship Navy was never just a number. It was an argument about the kind of world power America wants to be. It was a statement that the United States intends to remain the dominant naval force on Earth, not just in quality, not just in technology, not just in the courage of its sailors, but in the sheer industrial capacity to build and sustain a fleet worthy of that ambition. Whether America can make good on that statement, whether the gap between aspiration and reality can be closed before the strategic window narrows irretrievably, is one of the most consequential questions of this decade. The ships are not yet built. The workers are not yet trained. The budget commitments are not yet secured. The programs that have failed have to be replaced with programs that work. The industrial base that has been allowed to shrink has to be rebuilt painstakingly, year by year, contract by contract, welder by welder. None of it is easy. None of it is fast. All of it is necessary. The story of the 355-ship Navy is not finished. It is a story still being written in shipyards along the coasts of Virginia and Connecticut, in budget offices in Washington, in strategy sessions at the Pentagon, and in the quiet watch rooms of American submarines patrolling the deep Pacific. The promise has not been kept. Not yet. But the need that created that promise is more urgent than it has ever been. America made a promise. The question now is whether America has the will to keep it.